Dynasty Wonderland. This is your salary captain, Aaron Stewart, checking in. It's been a good while since we've recorded a Captain's Cabin episode. Since the last time we recorded an episode, I was knocked on my ass with COVID for 2 weeks and then 2 to 3 weeks of recovering after that. And I'm finally back to full health and getting used to things, and all that weight I lost, I've regained. And joining me is good old Dustin Martin, who hit me up a couple days ago and said, hey, I want to talk about Tony Pollard, and not just the player Tony Pollard. I mean, we live in Texas, we follow the Cowboys, but he wants to talk about Pollard for a specific reason, and that's a recent injury he had with this torn plantar fascia, which for us normal folks, we don't really know what that is. We don't know what this means. We've got a lot of coach talk about, oh, Pollard, he may miss a little bit of time. We're going to get into all about Tony Pollard and this injury. Dustin, man, how are you doing? Thanks for coming back to the Captain's Cabin.
Yeah, man, I'm glad to be back. I'm super happy to be back on here talking to you again.
All righty. So for people that don't know, my buddy Dustin works in the physical therapy field. He has been a PTA for quite a while. He is working on a bridge program. He's got to get a bachelor degree first, and he will be an eventual physical therapist. This guy knows a thing or two. Like when there's some injuries that I'm not familiar with, I mean, let's face it. We basically know torn ACLs, season-ending injuries, and that players may be a little slow the next season, but then the long term, they're going to be fine as long as they don't have a repeated history. But when we have something like a torn plantar fascia, I go, Dustin, what the heck is that? And what is the effects? Like, what should I know in fantasy football about this injury?
So the first thing is a plantar fascia tear isn't something that we normally see happen in football. And you'll see it a lot in basketball. You hear a lot of basketball players dealing with, plantar fasciitis or some sort of foot injury like that. But most of the time in football, we see ankle sprains like Jerry Jeudy or Christian McCaffrey having a high ankle sprain, or we see Derrick Henry with a Jones fracture, or we see Travis Etienne or Joe Mixon with a Liz Frank injury, but you don't hear a whole lot about torn plantar fascia. So what makes Tony Pollard really interesting is that he tore it versus just having an irritation, because most people have heard of plantar fasciitis and know that it has something to do with foot pain, but they don't know a whole lot about when you actually tear the fascia.
And with this plantar fascia, if we were to kind of put this in English here, like, how would you describe what it looks like?
So it's a thick fibrous connective tissue. So it's almost like a ligament, but not quite. I wouldn't say it's quite as tough as what a ligament is, but if I can give you, I traced this, I did not draw this, so I'm definitely not an artist. So I've got the bottom of a foot here. Now, the plantar fascia starts right at the base of the heel bone, and it runs up until about the middle of the foot, and then it fans out. So it fans out into almost these little finger-like projections that go almost to the base of your toes, like the ball of your foot here. So most of the time, whenever you have a plantar fascia injury, it's going to happen down here, where it attaches to the heel, because that's its anchor point. And as far as what it does, think of it like an arch support. We have our own built-in arch support with our plantar fascia, and it supports the arch of the foot by providing stiffness because it's thick and because it's fibrous. And arguably, its most important function is what we call the windlass mechanism. And if you don't know what a windlass is, you'll have to go find a YouTube video because I can't really explain it. But another way you could think of it is kind of a bowstring. So if you have a bow and you pull on the string, the arrow bends on either side, right? Mm-hmm. When you let off of the bow, the arrow straightens out again. So my other picture here. So this is looking at your foot from the side. When your big toe is dorsiflexed, when your big toe is up, as your foot is hitting the ground, it pulls the plantar fascia tight. Whenever we get to a fully flat foot on the ground. And as we are rolling through that step, it holds tension and it's almost like a spring. So it helps us have a semi-rigid foot to propel us forward.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. You
continue. No, you're fine. It would be kind of hard to push off of like a limp noodle foot, right? It needs to be rigid for us to be able to have propulsion, to be able to push forward and have something stiff to push off from. Does that make sense?
Yep, absolutely. So I think the analogy you use with the spring is vital there, because if people are kind of connecting the dots here of what a plantar fascia does and why an injury to it, a tear to it, they may be able to kind of connect the dots and go, oh, it's a spring and it's got a tear in it. And it seems that, correct me if I'm wrong on this, that would affect explosiveness, which people that know Tony Pollard from fantasy football or Cowboys fans I've watched know that this guy is lightning quick, and explosiveness is kind of his thing. It's a nice compliment to Ezekiel Elliott. So I don't know, am I in the ballpark with this? Would that affect that explosiveness?
It could to some degree. I don't see it. It's not going to end him by any means. And like I said, because a rupture is pretty unusual, if you've never dealt personally with plantar fasciitis, much less a rupture of your plantar fascia, it's painful. It's extremely painful. And, I've treated enough people with foot issues to know that plantar fasciitis is, it gives people difficulty just getting up out of bed in the mornings. So with a rupture, you can almost say that it's better to just go ahead and tear it fully, a complete rupture. And I couldn't find anything on whether Tony Pollard has a partial rupture or a complete rupture, but you would almost rather be a complete rupture, because then you don't have a portion of this fascia being tugged on every time you take a step, having to shorten and lengthen or shorten and lengthen.
Okay.
Obviously, which would be even more painful. So if it's a complete rupture, yeah, it hurts, but at least it's not continuing to get tugged on every time you take a step.
I could see that. Like, that would cause some irritation there. All right, Dustin. So the question on the mind of me and other Tony Pollard fantasy managers is, what can we realistically expect in terms of him returning to play? Mike McCarthy says that Pollard's questionable, even seemed to leave the door open that he could play this week. Is that a realistic expectation with this injury?
It's definitely a realistic expectation. It seems like it's going to be more of a pain tolerance issue for Pollard, and he didn't practice Wednesday. He did not practice Thursday. He did not practice today. So I think they're trying to give him as much time off of that foot as they can so that he can go on Sunday. We know that Zeke has been dealing with a knee injury, and he's been limping around the field for several weeks now and hasn't looked good at all.
Weeks or years?
Yeah. And while I was researching this episode, there is very, very little literature out there concerning the treatment or outcome of a plantar fascia tear. Although surgery seems to be very, very rare. I didn't find really hardly anything except for one study, and it was on 5 athletes that had a plantar fascia surgery. So it's not something that they go to a whole lot. The few resources that I did find seem to be pretty big on resting initially, and some offloading strategies like wearing a boot or wearing shoe orthotics, or sometimes even altered weight bearing, so using crutches or something of that nature, and then gradually returning back to sport. However, the Cowboys are leading the NFC East, and 4 of their next 5 games are against division rivals. So I don't see Pollard getting a whole lot of time off if he's able to gut it out and go, because all we have backing up Pollard and Zeke are Corey Clement. Ito Smith got signed to the practice squad, and past that, you don't have a whole lot.
Yeah. Not a lot of proven depth whatsoever. Corey Clement, his primary role, the thing that's kept him in the league is special teams. For people that play Dynasty, they may remember years ago Corey Clement, because he was part of the Eagles team that won the Super Bowl, and there seemed to be some potential hype of him becoming something, but really has just settled into a role of special teams, and this is his perfect role. He's the emergency guy. So you're right. It's a little bleak because the Cowboys have relied on a two-headed rushing attack to get them through most of the season. And I think that further proves, along with all the injuries we've seen to like Christian McCaffrey and the preseason injuries like J.K. Dobbins, Cam Akers, Travis Etienne, that like really you got to have multiple guys. And
absolutely,
look at what the Patriots are doing with multiple guys who do different roles. It's frustrating in fantasy, but makes perfect sense in the NFL. So it's pain tolerance with Tony Pollard. Do you think they would limit his reps until they get maybe a little closer? Because the Cowboys still have a little bit of a lead in the division. They've kind of slumped a little bit since winning 6 straight games. They've basically been going back and forth, win, loss, win, loss. You think they might ease them back in? They're still, including this weekend, 5 games. All right, Dynasty Wonderland. There will always be full transparency, whether it's from Ryan, your other host, or from me. And we've experienced some technical difficulties. So when you watch the full video, you listen to the podcast, and you're like, that's a really weird transition there. It's because we've had to record a few multiple parts and have to kind of sew it together. So it's going to be fun.
Blame Dustin's Wi-Fi.
We're going to blame Dustin's Wi-Fi. I get to hand this to Ryan. He gets to do the editing, and I just sit here and I get to host. I got the easiest job of this. So Dustin, there was one thing that was really interesting, caught my attention with plantar fascia, because to kind of recap a little bit, he talked about it kind of functioning like ligaments. And I've mentioned a couple times, I think of like ACL with football injuries. That's a ligament. And the interesting thing you said was it's a non-surgical repair for plantar fascia. So when I think of something being torn, I'm like, oh, great. We got to go and get surgery to repair everything. But you said, no, put it on a walking boot and it, I guess, repairs itself. It's quite interesting. You and me both, we play a lot of Dynasty football. We love Dynasty football. That seems to be some great news for Tony Pollard in Dynasty, that it's non-surgical repair. Is my thinking correct on that?
Yeah, for sure. We might have some issues the rest of the season with him missing practice or having his reps limited in games, or he might look a little slower because, it's super painful. But long-term, once off-season starts and he's able to actually let it rest and start to heal and then gradually work back into, getting back on that foot full-time again, I don't think he's going to have any issues long-term. But the league that we play in together, and for those who don't know, Aaron and I play in a Dynasty league with 45-man rosters. And so we've got super deep rosters. And I went ahead and picked up both Corey Clement and Ito Smith yesterday because we don't know what's going to happen. In redraft, I'm not interested in either one of those guys. I'm not wasting a roster spot on Clement or Ito Smith unless they say, hey, Zeke's going to IR with his knee or Pollard's going to IR with his foot, then maybe. But until then, I'm not really interested in either one of those.
Interesting. So that could be, and this is always a fun conversation we have with people on Twitter, because you talk about that Dynasty League. It's a nice transition to this. Our Dynasty League has no trade deadlines whatsoever. People go, what about playoffs? Let me reemphasize, we have no trade deadlines in Dynasty, because that's the way.
It's the only way to go.
It's the only way to go, because there are some crazy freaking trades that happen when the playoff teams, especially as they get closer to the championship, like teams are doing everything they can to get that final piece to build a super team. And I mention that because if you play in a dynasty league, Dynasty Wonderland listeners, and let's say you're a rebuilding team, Pollard may be a perfect buy opportunity, especially if Pollard's on one of those contending teams. Because truth is, if you're contending, you should be focusing on players that are helping you win right now. Deal with the future. Well, in the future, you make a bad trade or a short-sighted move, that's a problem for your future self. It's all about trying to win the championship. If you're rebuilding, Pollard has shown he has flashed and he's proven that he could be fantasy productive and fantasy relevant, despite being in this role where you go, he's a backup to Zeke and not playing, a huge amount of snaps. If you believe in the talent of Pollard, this is probably the best buy opportunity for him in the past, 2 years?
Yeah, and you should believe in the talent of Pollard.
Yeah, absolutely. The kid is a stud. We wait for a day, hopefully, where he gets to be the primary back. So I think we've covered it all here. We have talked about the plantar fascia, what it is, its function with foot. Foot injuries are scary for running backs, but if I heard you correctly, it could have been a lot worse here in that maybe this season, the playoff push, it's unfortunate, temper expectations, but the long term, the career of Tony Pollard, they dodged a bullet there.
I don't think his career is in jeopardy at all.
Thank goodness, because those foot injuries, you never know. We don't want a Christian McCaffrey before Tony Pollard even gets to be Christian McCaffrey. Yeah, I said it. It could happen. Those Memphis running backs, Antonio Gibson, we got all kinds of pass-catching running backs. That's a little bit over the top there. We'd love to see Tony Pollard be CMC, but foot injuries. We're not concerned with this one with Tony Pollard. Dustin, man, thank you so much for explaining this injury, because as you started off with, you said, not a common injury. A lot of people don't know, myself included, what to do with this. Thank you for enlightening us on what to do with Mr. Tony Pollard.
Absolutely. You're welcome. Glad to be here.
And before we kick you off, that sounds a little aggressive. Before we say goodbye and make you walk the plank. Yeah, there we go. I'm going to make people walk the plank to get off the show.
There we go.
Where can people find you on social media? Because I always say people that know injuries, especially in this wonderful game we play in fantasy football, you should be following people that know injuries because they'll make you better at this game. Dustin, where can they find you on social media?
So Twitter is the only platform that I'm really active as far as fantasy goes. My Twitter handle is @Martin_DustinC. And I don't tweet a whole lot, but I'm happy to answer questions. My DMs are open. So if you have questions or, if you would like more clarification, I'd be more than happy to have a conversation with you.
Absolutely. And to the audience too, throw some commissioner questions at him. Dustin commissions all kinds of different leagues. It's insane. I gladly co-commission leagues, but he's always been like 2, 3, 10 steps ahead of me on commish questions. Send him some questions. You'll get some great answers. He will give you some ideas to consider to make your leagues more interesting. Absolutely give him a follow. And also, if you're listening to the show on YouTube, give us a thumbs up. It's just nice to see 1 or 2 thumbs up. You can hit the dislike button. YouTube's changed things, and I guess we can't see how many people dislike it. Let us know what you like about the show. Let us know what you don't like about the show. If you're listening on podcast platforms, we should be on all the platforms that you listen to podcasts. Give us a review. Yeah, same thing. Tell us what you like, what you don't like. Ryan's going to be doing some of his shows where it's going to be kind of similar format. Shorter show than usual, and different things as we wind down the regular season. It's when we start doing more different shows. Hopefully Captain's Cabin becomes a regular occurrence. Dustin will definitely be back on the show. Do I know when? No, I don't. But whenever we got something interesting, not that we hope for injuries, he'll be back. He will tell you about the injury, what to do in redraft, and what to do in Dynasty, because we are the Dynasty Wonderland. You can find me at AaronStew09 on Twitter. You can find our podcast, The Dynasty Wonderland, at DW_1 I think I just screwed that up. I screwed the pooch on that one. Brian's going to leave that one in. We're going to try this again at DW_pod. I don't even know my own Twitter. It's great. So,
Shame.
Dustin, thank you so much for joining me in. And
Yes, sir.
to the Dynasty Wonderland, this is your salary captain checking out.
Remove the trade deadlines from your dynasty leagues.
Love it. Love it.